so y'all see that?
Yes, Polly, I can see your screen.
Great. All right, cool. I'm gonna give it just a few more seconds while I try to figure some other stuff out. All right. Great. As long as you can still see my screen, everything looks good.
Everything looks good.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fundraising Friday in the middle of September, which I'm like totally cannot at all believe it's the middle of September already. This year for me has been flying by. I don't know if y'all feel the same way. But I am Polly Stamatopoulos. I am the Senior Director of Movement Group Engagement here at Progressive Multiplier, and I am your training host today. As we usually do, we try to have fun with pictures on our first slide of the deck, and today's slide is brought to you by the good people of Michigan who have fought to put reproductive rights back on the ballot. To try to protect reproductive justice in the state. So giving a little shout out to the efforts of folks in Michigan right now. There's lots of stuff happening all over the country with voting rights and repro justice and all the things and all of the things that many of our grantees are working on. So we usually try to lift all that stuff up. So this is the Progressive Multiplier team. We like to say we are small but mighty, but today I've got a backup with my buddy V from our chief storyteller, who's making sure that I don't lose track of stuff that folks post in the chat, because I do sometimes do that because I get to talking and I don't get to looking. But she's going to stay off camera unless she feels like popping on. It's up to her. But this is the team. If you ever have any questions and you want to get past me, these are the folks that you would reach out to, that you could reach out to. But you might actually see them, not just me, but other members of the team show up during Fundraising Fridays. Everyone likes to pitch in and be of help and also just listen in. If you are not familiar, Progressive Multiplier is a funding intermediary, and that we focusing on progressive movements, and we believe in organizing people and organizing money, and we like to amplify what we call people-powered movements, or not just us, but lots of folks refer to it as people-powered movements. We have 3 areas of our grant making: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. As a funding intermediary, what that means is we raise money to then give it away. So we sometimes are in periods where we have money to give out. Sometimes we have periods where we're trying to get that money. But if you're ever interested in learning more about our grant making opportunities, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm the one who works directly with our movement groups on grant making and obviously the training, our training modules too. It's never a bad idea if you're interested. If you have a fundraising experience, we fund fundraising experiments. We're probably one of the only grant makers that does that. If you've got a fundraising experiment that you would love to try and would love to get funding and support to do that, you can always go to our website and fill out our general LOI and reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk with you. And if the stars align and things happen, maybe you can become a grantee too. Fundraising Fridays are brought to you by the Resilience Initiative, our friends at the Resilience Initiative and the Leader Trust. If you're here today, it's probably because you work with or know these folks already. But as part of our trying to keep track and report back to the folks that provide this training opportunity, if you could drop your name in the chat with your with the organization that you're with, where you are, your affiliation, what you do, whatever, just say hi to each other. We like to try to make this a bit of a community, but it also gives us an opportunity to double check our attendees list and make sure that we're reporting accurately on our grant too. So what does this partnership bring? This partnership not only brings Fundraising Fridays, which is twice a month with a educational session, more like talkie in the first one, and the second one of the month is more freestyle, open, deep dive conversation where we get to hear about what's going on in the field and in the movement, basically where you guys do the talkie. But I actually like it this time too, so speak up, y'all. But we also provide coaching. If you are part of the Resilience Initiative, Leaders Trust, reach out to Michelle Mingle. If you want to get some one-on-one coaching, you can get an hour, you can get up to 5 hours. And there are still slots available from now through the end of the calendar year. So the just to sort of keep up with what's with our schedule till the end of the year, we have you know, clearly today is about peer-to-peer fundraising, and our next one is going to be the deep dive, the more conversational one that we have. That'll be on the September 30th. Then we're going to go into hybrid events. We're going to talk about reports and reporting and how you communicate your information not only to your board and internally to your organization, but we can even talk about how we report externally. And then there's going to be a whole lot of prognosticating for next year and thinking about how to plan for our calendar year 2023 fundraising plans. If anyone has any questions, concerns, wants me to spend any specific focus in these future sessions, hit me up, let me know. I would love to make sure that I am tailoring these trainings to the needs of the folks who are attending the trainings. So if there's something in particular that you want to see, for example, in the hybrid events one, let me know. Does anybody have anything right now that they want to ask or add or flag for me?
Hey, Polly, it's Carol Joyner.
Hey.
From Family Values at Work Action. I was wondering if you could just describe hybrid events. Are they really just fundraising events that are online and in person, and how you conduct them? Is it more a technical conversation? That would be super helpful.
Yes, that will definitely be part of the training, but just as a snippet now, we are talking about how you know, in the age of COVID, it's not, because it's not over, or not I'm not saying that it is, but we've learned a lot about about how you can do events virtually. And as people start coming back together, there's still going to be people who can't or won't come back to big group settings. And so we wanted to talk about tips and tricks on how to make a live and virtual hybrid work well for your organization. It also might, you know, lower the barrier to entry and give your folks more of your folks greater opportunity to participate in events that aren't currently able to. So that's what our thinking is for hybrid events, and we'll go into detail on that when we do those presentations. If there's something specific, Carol, about hybrid events that you'd like to hear about, or a specific type of hybrid event, let me know. I'd love to hear. Feel free to say it now, or if you want to think on it, you can hit me up later, whatever you want.
Nope, thanks so much.
All right, so we are launching into peer-to-peer fundraising. So I'm just going to say up front, I didn't add a whole lot of slides to this deck because I figured that there's going to be a lot of conversation. So I hope I'm right. I want you all to just speak up. Don't feel like you have to raise your hand, but if you do want to raise your hand, please feel free. You can put questions in the chat, and I will try to keep up with them. V is also going to try to make sure I don't miss any. But you know, I really want this to be these fundraising Fridays to be conversational. It feels weird to just sort of be talking at a computer screen. So when people talk back at me, I do feel like I'm, you know, like it's a conversation. So please participate. It's just me like asking, begging for that. I am a little bit of a nervous speaker, even though I've done tons of these. It makes it a little easier when I hear folks participate and I can see eyeballs. So, all right, jumping right in. So today's conversation is going to be about peer-to-peer fundraising, why you should try it, what are the common activities, what are the methods, a little bit different than activities, and how do you build a P2P campaign? It's a lot it feels like a lot to cover, but I promise you it's actually going to be fairly intuitive if you've done fundraising for more than a minute. So I'm going to start off with a question. I want to hear what you all are doing. If you guys are already doing peer-to-peer actively, are you thinking about it? What's going on in your organizations? Anyone?
Good morning. It's Kirsten.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to think of something to ask. I think it's interesting because I think the P2P is definitely, I'm seeing a real impact at my small organization where I've only been for 13 months. And I'm prepping to do some coaching with my board and our staff. And the level of discomfort is actually shocking to me because of how long some of the folks have been either with the organization or at the board. So I'm really looking for tools to break through that inertia that maybe I haven't tried before. So love to hear what folks are doing.
I hear ya. Angela, you said you're thinking about doing an open house?
Yes. So we're thinking that's sort of like our first way of bringing people back together in person and then do like a light pass.
So it sounds like having peer-to-peer and hybrid events as back-to-back topics is not a bad idea.
No, it's great. Thank you. We have done it. We have done some small events, but but getting the dial turned in their minds that it's also an opportunity to network around fundraising. We had like a 16-person event. It's interesting. These are interesting times to be doing this kind of work. So,
Angela, have you done in-person events previously?
In the past, yes, we've always done in-person events. And then since COVID happened, nothing. And so now we're trying to figure out how to bring people back together.
Michelle, you said you've always been too intimidated to try P2P. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I guess I've done it with like a board or like committee, but to try it with like a broader audience, I has always just felt like a really heavy lift. Like, how do I like get everything together and then like recruit enough people to do it to actually like make it worth it and successful. So I've done it, I guess, maybe at a higher level, but not at like a grassrootsy level, which is what I'm kind of curious about. How do I make that work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I'd like to hear from other people. Have the people who've done sort of peer-to-peer fundraising, is there a distinction in your mind about the grassroots type peer-to-peer versus the like board peer-to-peer? And do you have like more comfort with one versus the other? Maybe. All right. We'll see how it goes. All right, so let's get into what it is and why you should be doing it. So peer-to-peer fundraising gives your supporters the power to raise money for your organization. Clearly, I mean, there's a lot of things that's intuitive about what peer-to-peer, just by the name, what peer-to-peer fundraising is. Some of the great things about it is it does allow, one of the things that I like about it is allows your supporters, volunteers, participants, however you want to label them, as the people who get to tell the story to their friends about why they love your work or why they think the work that you do is important. It allows them to authentically connect with their people in their lives about your mission. So it feels less like, I don't know, like a sales pitch than it does a conversation between friends. It's by nature relational because it's social and it's intimate. It's Polly asking V to support, this organization or that because of how that organization impacted me, or I just dig it. And because of that relational, personal, intimate connection, it is by nature a trust-based fundraising. And if you remember when we were talking about the giving crisis in the last set of Fundraising Fridays, we did talk about skepticism in our fundraising world. And that skepticism is something that feels like it's growing more and more. P2P allows you to break down some of that skepticism because it's definitely different if I'm asking someone who knows me and respects me to support a group than if they get an acquisition mailing or email from that group and they don't understand or why and they don't know anybody there. So you can see that it automatically brings that trust factor up. The other nice thing about P2P is that it can be online or offline. And from anybody who's been around for a minute will know that like this started a long time ago in the offline days, and I'm going to get into that a little bit, but I sometimes sort of like to demystify some of the things that we talk about in fundraising, like everything old is new again. But that's important because we've always had these tricks up our sleeves and we can dust them off and use them again. So that's what it is. It's about people, organizing people to bring money and support, not just money, but people to organizations that they care about. And if we do it right, we can help them and bring those people into our organization. Why is peer-to-peer really useful right now in this moment? I think it's because, especially as we just mentioned with COVID, folks are really craving experiences and connection. Now, some P2P fundraising is just like, me on my Facey space asking folks to give to a charity because it's my birthday. And that might not feel like a meaningful experience or connection, but it can be way more than that. It can be virtual events. It can be live events. It can be a phone call and a conversation and something that's much more meaningful. It can be everything in between. But the fact that it is a person talking to a friend or family member automatically brings up the level of connection. So don't, I actually do feel like it is a way to bridge that or to nurture that craving for an experience. As I mentioned, it helps guards against that whole giving crisis conversation that philanthropy is having because it is so intimate and it is personal. And it guards against the whole issue of skepticism. P2P allows you to build deeper relationships with your supporters, your volunteers, the people who are actually doing the fundraising on your behalf. If you think about it, these folks are like doing the most. Like they're not just responding to your advocacy campaigns. They're not, and I'd say just in italics, please. They're not just giving you money, but they're also reaching out to other people and are pointing a finger at your organization and be like, these guys are worthy. These folks, you got to go check these folks out. And as soon as you see someone do that, that should be an immediate like fireworks display going off in your head of like, these folks love us. Maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, but if you didn't know that, you know, like, to me, that's like, I'm going to run to that person and reach out and have a conversation and find out all about them and find out, you know, how we popped on their radar if I didn't know already. But they're basically raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm a fan, you should talk to me. So it lets you figure out with like almost no cost, who in your list you should be paying closer attention to. It helps you expand your fundraising efforts with the help of volunteers and not a lot of money. Of course, there can be an investment. There often is an investment, but there doesn't have to be much. So there really is a scale. If you're worried about like the return on the investment, or not just the ROI part of it, but like, how much labor am I going to have to produce to make this a successful campaign? There's, you know, just like anything, there's a scale, and you can do what works for you. The other thing that if you really sort of let yourself, you can open your organization up to lots of really creative things. People, I don't know about y'all, but like, my friends are crazy interesting. And if they wanted, you know, like, they might have like, a really wild idea for something and turn it into a fundraiser for an organization that I'm involved in. I've had multiple times in my career where somebody's contacted me and been like, hey, I had this idea, I'm going to do this fundraiser for you guys. And I've been like, wow, would have never thought of that, would never put that on my budget, but you know, you do you. And they've been like crazy successful, you know, like in terms of like for what that person did. So you can have like really interesting, you get really interesting experiences. I've had situations where people set up competitions, you know, of course, a typical like dinner party and stuff like that, but also like baking. There was like a baking contest between a group of friends, and whoever won the best cookie, they you know, they got, you know, got the donation to our organization in their name, and you know, everybody had to give a certain dollar amount or whatever. So we've had some really interesting things, and like, and yes, we did share the cookie recipe with their people. and it was good. But you open yourself to like creativity and fun, and that's always a good thing. So like I said, peer-to-peer isn't new, but the name is. Nonprofits of all sizes have been doing this. You don't have to feel like it's this new, shiny, different thing. The ways that it happens can be varied and different. Like, as Kirsten mentioned, like board fundraising is peer-to-peer typically. When your friend is like all amped up because they're running the first 5K and they're like, hey, give $5 to the animal shelter because that's who I'm running the 5K for, that's peer-to-peer. I argue that Girl Scout cookie time is peer-to-peer. And believe I'm not the only one who buys the cookies, but I'm not entirely sure. You know, when, as I mentioned, the whole like, hey, give instead of a present, give to this organization for my birthday. And then of course, the big ones that we're most familiar with is when like your whole city shuts down because there's a major walk, run, event, ride thing, where thousands of people are filling the streets because they're supporting their local fill in the blank cause. So I did a little research to figure out like, when did, you know, these bigger live events start happening? I was interested to learn that the first walkathon fundraiser happened in 1953 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, that raised $85,000 for cancer, for a local cancer charity. And that walk has actually continued to happen. I think the last one that they talked about was like a return in honor of Diplo, the comedian who came up with the idea. But you know, every AIDS walk, breast cancer 3-day, runs, rides, whatever, is based on this very first walkathon. And I don't know how many of y'all are old school fundraisers, but back in the day, every time I think of peer-to-peer, I think about like, you know, clipboards with lists and envelopes and knocking on doors and getting people to support the. I remember being a kid and doing the March Dimes Walkathon in DC. I mean, sorry, in Baltimore, and like literally like getting my neighbors to sponsor me 10 cents a mile. And then when I finished it, I went around and I collected, you know, $2.50 from each neighbor and put it in my little envelope and mailed it off. All of that is peer-to-peer fundraising. You still love clipboards, right? um, there is also this thing that I thought was sort of funny, was like dance marathons gained big popularity, so much so that states had to like create no dance marathon rules or rules around dance marathons because people died at dance marathons. They started out as being not for charity. They eventually became fundraising events, and they still happen today. Or as I was saying, they're still grooving after all this time. When I'm a child of the 70s, and when I was a kid, I didn't really understand why every sitcom had a dance marathon episode. I now understand why that is the thing. And, you know, Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley were not the only places doing dance marathons. Then we had Hands Across America. So what I'm trying to sort of show off is like, even in our history, we had these varied and different types of things. If anyone participated in Hands Across America in the 80s, this was an attempt to raise money for hunger. And it was brainchild of, I'm forgetting his name now. But the thought was we can get Americans to hold hands literally across one end of the country to the other. It didn't quite make it. There was like too much of a gap in those desert areas. But 6 million people held hands for 15 minutes and raised $15 million for in general operating support to provide pre-COVID, definitely to raise money for hunger. And I believe it was USA for Africa who eventually also then did Feed the World, that big soundtrack. And I would even say the Ice Bucket Challenge. That's probably the one that we're most familiar with. I don't know that people would call that peer-to-peer because we think of it more as like we think of it as like a standalone challenge thing. But if you think about how the challenge went down, is you had to tag your friends and tell them, you know, donate to charity or dump this bucket of ice water on your head. And most people did both. Most people tagged their friends, gave to ALS, and then also dumped the ice bucket on their heads. And that raised $220 million. So hearing about like, you know, here are just in this bit of history, for distinctly different types of large scale peer-to-peer fundraising. We talked a little bit about what the benefits are, a little bit about what folks get out of it. Tell me what you guys are thinking so far. Were you thinking any of these are peer-to-peer? Would you argue? Would you be like, fight me? You know, like I don't agree. Tell me. Oh, wow. Folks need some caffeine today. I'm not feeling the love right now.
Well, can I just say that I think, you know, every time some new phraseology like that's my own personal special word, comes along to kind of highlight practices that we've been doing for a while, it also provides me with an opportunity to take a less jaded look at some of the things that we have done and to do a little like check-in internally, organizationally with, have we been doing this? How are we meeting these? And I before I ask my board or talk to the team about, peer-to-peer fundraising, I try and highlight how they've already been doing it, because I always feel like that's a really good jumping off point to create some ease around it. And then like I just finished prepping some talking points for my board members, because we're going into the weeds of my first gala in 3 years. It's not ours. We're not having a gala. I could go the rest of my life and never hear that word again. But but we are attending something that's it's a 40th anniversary of the Marine Sanctuary movement, and that's kind of a big thing for us as an environmental educating hub. So, but prepping some stuff that I don't expect them to go out and share it, but I'm hoping to kind of inspire them to think about what they want to share, what moves for them. So all of these things, anything where you're making direct human contact, to me really falls under the category of peer-to-peer.
Absolutely. Marisa, you came on camera for a second. Was it just to smile, or did you have something you wanted to
I
say?
think what's really interesting about like the history is I'm still fairly new to fundraising. So I think it's really cool to think about how multiple things can be considered peer-to-peer fundraising. Like I'd never thought, like it makes it, like now that I'm hearing it, it makes a lot of sense to think of like dance marathons as peer-to-peer fundraising. And it just makes me realize how many different things you can do to encourage your board, your supporters to participate in peer-to-peer fundraising. And so it's giving me a lot of things to think about. So thank you. Yeah.
So honestly, all peer-to-peer is that instead of you making the ask, you're creating the situation, or you're creating the tools that exist so that other people can make the ask. That is like probably the shortest way, the cleanest way that I can think of to define what peer-to-peer really is. The thing that you do, the campaign, the event, whatever, on some level is inconsequential because it is the opportunity for people to ask other people for you. Yeah, so total, like thinking about that, do you feel like, oh wow, now I have this really broad like way to think about this? Is there like, does it make it feel more accessible, or does it make it feel more daunting?
No, I think it makes it feel more accessible, because I think right now my thought was like, oh, the only access that like the organization I work for can do peer-to-peer fundraising is like Facebook, like Facebook fundraisers. But now I think it goes beyond that. I feel like my brain's like, oh, we can like, it's anything where you're asking your supporters or like your biggest champions to champion for the organization. And I think the thing that sometimes makes peer-to-peer fundraising a little bit daunting for me is how to gain retention from those donors. And I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on about that. Do you tend to ask the people who are doing the peer-to-peer fundraising to hold those relationships, or like what does that look like? And I'm like curious to hear from other people like what it looks like at your organization, because that's something that I've started to think about, because originally I was like, well, I guess it's just Facebook and I can't track that well.
Yeah, retention it's a really good question. And I'm a little bit kicking myself because I'm just recalling that I wanted to do a specific slide all on retention, and then didn't. But that's why we do these in 2 parts. I have a second chance next time to like maybe flesh it out more, but we will be talking about it today. retention, when you get a donor from an outside source, you have to think about it in the same terms as you do when you do like a general acquisition. Like 5 minutes ago, these people were strangers and now they came to our organization. So what I always used to say to my team is like, there are donors to lose, and we try not to lose donors. We try to keep our friends close, or, and so you have to treat them the same way you would treat every other new person to your organization. Like I said, we'll go into a little bit, but are you inviting them to join your newsletter? Or do you have a welcome series? Are you doing some extra high touch? But there's some other things that you can sprinkle in to make that relationship stronger too, that's specific to peer-to-peer. About the question about like, do they hold the relationship? I think it depends. I think like, if it were a board member who brought in a donor, I would really work hard to transfer that relationship onto the organization. But while that board member was still a board member, that board member would be heavily involved in that relationship. Like every time I communicated with that person, I'd CC that board member. Maybe I asked the board member to make the end of the year ask. Maybe, I would communicate a lot with the board member to make sure they understood that even though that's their friend, they brought them to the organization and we need to transfer the relationship. Sometimes it can get a little tricky. If it's like random person, picture, organization to be the beneficiary of their in lieu of gifts for their wedding, it gets a little bit trickier, because first you got to build a relationship probably with that couple. Then you have to build a relationship with their guests who actually do make the gift. But that's where all of our solid relationship building skills really do come into play. And some of those solid retention tactics.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so a little redundant when we're talking about some peer-to-peer activities. And like I said in the beginning, like everything on some level, peer-to-peer is just really baked in the cake for how fundraisers work. Like I can't help but think about when any nonprofit I've ever worked with was starting, they always started with like around a kitchen table with like 2 or 3 friends who come up with an idea, then they incorporate. And the first thing that they have to do is start asking all their friends and family for money. Like before they even know what fundraising is or that it has a name, they're doing fundraising and they're doing peer-to-peer fundraising. So that's what I mean by like, it is not new. It is really like foundational to how we do it. What is really different is now there's all this technology that can support us, but you don't have to do it in a technology driven way. So like you were saying, Marisa, like if all the focus was Facebook, yeah, I mean, I'd be like, yay, great. Thanks for helping us out. And now I got to figure out how to find the names of those donors. And now I've got to, like there's obstacles that have come up because, the good-hearted person did this thing, but they didn't do it in a way that was like, more than just financially beneficial. But, like there's lots of opportunities to use lots of different tools. But I'm being sort of minimalistic here in the way that I'm going to break down the ways that there are peer-to-peer fundraising, and I've broken them down in 2 ways: people-based and calendar-based, and totally simplistic. And I want to be pushed back on it. And if you think about other ways, let me know. Let's talk about it. But so I gave here like 2 examples of like people-based, and I think of it as like, so board giving, somebody who's like, hey, I'm going to invite some of my friends over. Are you interested in coming to my house and like doing like a 5-minute spiel on like your organization's work, and then we'll pass a hat? That's somebody that's like a person driven event. It's, like typically just will fall anywhere within your fiscal year. It can be sometimes driven around like Giving Tuesday, because Giving Tuesday has become, for example, a really publicized event, and folks are encouraged outside of your nonprofit just by the Giving Tuesday people to do campaigns on behalf of organizations, that folks are really taking the initiative and doing things. Depending on what they are, they need to be really heavily supported by staff, and significant stewardship is needed. Meaning this is exactly what you're talking about, like trying to figure out doing the things that you need to do when you get those donors to try to make them sticky, to make them, you know, like not need that person to make the relationship with the organization stay around. Honor, memory, and in lieu of gifts are very similar. Clearly not bound to the calendar. Usually doesn't take very much planning at all. You just find out that somebody put you in their the wedding invitation as like, instead of, you know, in lieu of gifts, please. But the follow-up can be important. If you want to turn these folks into donors to your organization, then you need to do all the things to make them friends. You need to connect. You need to add them to your, you know, try to add them to the list. They might just very much be like, I have no interest. I just gave because, you know, Sally and Jesse asked me to. So fine, cool. You got the one-time gift. That's a lovely thing. But when you can, you bring them into the, you do the things that you would normally do to bring them into the fold. The calendar-based ones are like, I think of them, the way that I think about the calendar-based ones, it's like there's a start date and an end date. The activities happen between these two dates, or maybe it's just a day. These things are happening on this day. And it's very much driven by that. It's not any time of the year for any reason, but it's a thing. It's, you know, like I mentioned the walkathons and stuff like that. Some of them are like pay by the mile. Some of them are like, I just did the 5K, so give me money. I don't know about you, but I attended a whole bunch of virtual dance parties during COVID. I don't know if it's just my generation, but I would say I have like 6 or 7 friends who are DJs at least. And it was like every weekend somebody was hosting a virtual dance party with a virtual tip jar that they were collecting money for. I had one friend who did one almost every weekend for the restaurant workers who lost out on lots of money during COVID. And so it was like a way to give back to the restaurants and bars that he DJ'd at on the weekends, to try to, and the money that was raised got split between all of the tipped employees at that place. Another dance party that a friend of mine hosted was specifically to get PPE to medical staff at a local clinic. So I saw a lot of virtual dance parties during COVID, and they were personally organized, sometimes through a nonprofit, sometimes not. So that's what I mean by event-based, but they can be lots of different things. Of course, giving days, special days, and I know an organization that does a peer-to-peer campaign every year around their anniversary, and it's like a 5-day thing. And they've done it so many years that like it has become a thing. Like their donors know it's coming, their donors participate, the new donors become peer fundraisers even the very next year, because it's so baked in. So it can be just about, so it can, you know, like it can really have legs. And the nice thing about a calendar, creating calendar-based incentives is that it's something that you can look forward to. It gives people a deadline. I don't know about you, but I work well with a deadline. I think most people do. When it's just willy-nilly, people who are self-directed, who are good at being self-directed, will take you up on that too. So in my thinking, it's sort of on the scale of like high amount of work for me to do to low amount of work for me to do. The lowest amount of work to do is just to like be prepared, so that when somebody's like, hey, you know, I'm turning 50 this year and I want to have a big party, but I don't want gifts because I'm a grown up and who needs that? So instead I'd like you to give, I'd like all of my guests to give to your organization, but I need some materials here. You know, like I might be prepared to be able to respond to those things. The other end of the spectrum is like, we're going to do this whole week long thing around our city's giving days, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And there's a whole other set of things that you're going to need on that spectrum. And it really can be everything in between. So I'd like to hear like from you all, like what are the P2P activities you're hearing about or thinking about now, just in this early part, you know, about halfway through this presentation. Whoever wants to jump in, jump in. I'm going to pick on you, Michelle, since your camera's on.
Well, I guess this has made me realize that I already do kind of what you said was on the easy end, like that just be like we have people reach out and are like, hey, I want to raise money for you for this or that or the other thing. Like that happens all the time. And I support people with that. I think it's the more like on the other end thing that I'm like curious about, because I know, you know, we have some partner organizations that do really successful like peer-to-peer fundraising event. Like they have a big event and a big part of it is like trying to get their supporters to like commit to raising however much money for it. And that's the thing that's always just seemed like a lot of work. And I'm like, especially to do the first one, like I think once it's probably established and people expect it and know about it, and you just have the people that do it every single year, I imagine it's really awesome. And I guess I've always been curious, like, how do I start it? Like, is it going to pay off the first year, or is there like a, you know, it pays off in the third year? Yeah, that's the thing that I'm just that overwhelms me a little bit, is trying to figure out if that's worth it and how to go about it.
As far as like whether it pays off in the first year or not, everything that I've seen and sort of think about intuitively says that the effort that you put into peer-to-peer it's like that one of the highest ROIs. So if you remember, you know, in your old, you know, fundraising books, like my James Greenfield Fundraising Fundamentals book, it would, you know, they'd have a like, it takes 25 cents to raise $1 in direct mail. It takes, you know, this amount to raise this and this. And like personal asks, which is how we used to just call it, it was like had the highest return on investment. It was like, you know, you spend nothing and you get $1,000, you know, but that's because they often didn't include things like staff time. I think of it in the same category, that like it is important to gauge staff time. And I think that we should be, so that we can get better metrics for ourselves. But the nice thing that I like about peer-to-peer, whether you're going to use some fancy tool, or if you're going to go old school, or you're just going to be prepared, I think that like it's like a set it and forget it situation. Like once you build the thing for the self-initiated, the supporter initiated side, once you build the things, they just sit on the shelf that people can use. If you then decide that you want to do a more directed thing, a campaign related, calendar based, organized by you and people, those tools that you created for the self-directed folks are your foundation pieces for doing the other stuff. So you sort of can't go wrong. So it's good that you already have some of those things, because you basically are like probably more than half of the way through from a campaign's perspective. I would say if you know, if you're thinking about doing something like that's more campaign driven, that's like, let's round up some of our favorite supporters and see if we can get something done. Test it, you know, like the board makes the most sense. I also know how hard it is to work with board members sometimes. Like they've got responsibilities for the organization already. I'm not trying to say that board members are lazy or bad or anything like that, but there's a lot of people in the organization already pulling at them, and having the fundraiser pulling at them too can sometimes feel like a bit much. But if your organization has a give or get policy, which a lot of organizations do, not all, then the board member might already be like, I need to figure out how to get my friends to give. And so then you can get creative with them. Either you can set up a campaign where all of the board members are doing all the same things all at the same time, or you can go board member to board member and be like, oh, this dude is like a super social dude and he's got a great house. And, then you tap them and be like, hey, how about, you and your spouse have a nice little dinner party. Think about, 5 to 10 people who you think would really groove on our organization, and you help them through that process. But it can also be like, this is our board giving challenge, and you do a whole, challenge thing where the board members for the next month are going to be putting together their lists and calling their friends and doing all the things, and maybe create a tool. So I think that there's, think about like, one of my mantras is always like you think about what you can do that you can do well. And then you try to figure out, how can I just add one thing that won't kill me, that will make it slightly better? And that's how I would even look at peer-to-peer. Like, what is between what you have now and where you could go, what is the one thing that you could add to make it slightly better? And then you could test, like I said, you could test it with a group of friends, you could test it with your board, you could test it with any number of folks. What other folks are thinking? Has anyone heard about a really cool peer-to-peer campaign that they would love to do or just think is neat? Carol?
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble, I guess, with the peer-to-peer notion, although I can think of one or two things we've done in the past. But the reason I'll say first why I'm having a little trouble with the notion of it is because we're a network. We typically raise money with foundations and donors to move paid leave and paid sick days and other policies, right? Typically, our membership is 27 state coalitions and their partners. And our goal has always been to raise money for them. And so going back to them and asking them, I'm curious to know, like in these kinds of network situations, where it would be great for us to raise money, we're just going to give it right back to them. I think they may say, well, why don't we just raise the money for ourselves? Maybe we can come up with ideas and do our own like version of this peer-to-peer activity. Maybe we all do it together, but at the same time, and build a lot of energy both around the policies we're trying to pass and to raise money. But like in Michigan, that money is going to go to the Michigan-based organization, not to the national organization, right? Which I guess is fine, but we also need money on a national level to give back. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what does that look like? And I've also been involved in things before, even like, what is it called? When you give money to a campaign, like daily costs or anything like that, right? They'll say, well, not really daily costs, but any of the groups will say, you want to donate $25 to this person, $1 will go to us, right? The group that's sort of sourcing everyone together, bringing everyone together. So that might be a thing. I also know that I don't often give that extra $1. I want the money to go straight to the campaign. So that's tricky. So I'd love for you to talk about that. On this point, the only thing, I don't know if this is peer-to-peer, but the only thing we've probably done is like a vendor gave us a gazillion pieces of like a little tiny piece of art that you could wear. And then we basically said to our state, if that they could, give this to people in some sort of crowd sharing way. If they did a campaign that brought in more money. So it was really a lot of work for very little return, but I'll leave it there.
Well, I think the use of a premium or a gift is a really nice thing to do as a way to thank the people who participate in a peer-to-peer campaign, but specifically about like, how do you do it if you are if you're a network is interesting. I think one, you're always going to, you're always going to have folks who push back and like, well, why would I do this for you when I can do it for myself? Fine. Okay. You can say no. We're not forcing anybody to do anything. But you can also consider your peer-to-peer fundraising campaign to be for the whole network, and you put and also for you all specifically, like, get a piece of it. But you can like each member. I've never been part of a network that every member of the network, every member organization in the network was on equal footing. There's always like some rock star, and there's always some really like brand new nascent, like struggling, either because of their size or because where they were located or the work that they were doing. So I would probably, if I was in your shoes, I would do a peer-to-peer campaign that was like, this is a fundraising that we're all going to participate in, that I hope we all will participate in. And maybe you create a donation page that everyone builds off of. So it's more of a peer-to-peer using a crowdfunding model, where the donations are then distributed across all. So it's like we're all putting in activity. Some folks are going to have better lists than other folks, but the money is going to lift all boats. So yeah, you might get somebody who's like, well, I'm going to, be reaching out to my people and they're going to give more. We're all in this fight together. And that's the thing. Like, if somebody has friction and doesn't want to do it, they don't have to do it. Like, you can't, I don't want somebody who's negative to fundraise for me.
That's actually funny.
Don't bring that energy. So that's the other part of the peer-to-peer thing. It was like, somebody doesn't want to do it, they're not going to do it. I'd rather you not if you don't want to. So that's the way that I might approach it, is to be like, to the people who are questioning, is to say, look, you might have it easier to raise money, and I think that that's fantastic, but our network partner also needs the help, and this is going to help the whole network. It also might give you an opportunity to reach out. I don't know if you have individuals who support your work, or you want to bring individuals to support the work, because the network as a whole is so much more powerful than these individual groups, which is why we do networks and coalitions. So there are people who are just going to want to fund it because it's a network, and it gives you an opportunity to really push that story as to how you all are stronger together, and that's why people should be supporting that work. Does that make it feel a little bit more accessible to you?
It does. It certainly does. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure. So Kirsten, can you tell me a little bit more about by what you're asking for? In the chat, you said speak a little more about self-stable P2P tools.
You were speaking a few minutes ago, and you talked about the kind of a bank of powerful or effective P2P tools that you kind of keep. And I know what mine have been historically, but I was hoping that maybe folks could share whatever little, now that we've kind of clarified the broader definition of P2P and taken some of the terror out of it for a lot of us. I was wondering if there's what are things that folks offer as kind of a regular either outreach, if it's an event-based one, or if it's what are your go-tos when you need to make those connections, or if you have board tools that you know are effective for helping your board, with storytelling and engagements, or even fundraising. Heavens to Murgatroyd. That's kind of what I was speaking to. It's do folks have things that are their steadfast tools, or things that they're dusting off now that they are doing more in-person connectivity?
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying it. For some reason, I was like not understanding the question. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I'm going to pick on Michelle just because she already said that she has stuff. If you don't mind sharing, Michelle, what are the kinds of things that you've shared with people who said they wanted to do fundraising on your behalf?
Well, I will admit it's a little bit more ad hoc than I would like it to be right now. So it's more like people reach out to me and then I figure out what they need and create it. But this is like, I just put in my plan, to think next year about like taking time to actually build some of those out and like have them somewhere publicly too, so people can also find them on their own. But like some of the things that I've started building out, like we have a couple of supporters that are doing house parties for us next week. So I've like, now have kind of a template like house party, RSVP format and invitation, that sort of thing. We have quite a few people that do like Facebook fundraisers for us. So actually my predecessor had built out like a whole like how to do a Facebook fundraiser for gender justice guide. And we do have that up on the website. Trying to think if those are the couple examples coming to mind right now.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Those are great. Yeah. And anything anybody has, they don't all have to be creative events, or I mean, that's kind of what I'm talking about too, is that now that we have the more broader definition, like even just how do you have conversations with individual people on your board is the other thing I'd love to hear about.
I've been trying with, well, trying is a generous word. I told our board that I was going to do like a pen pal program this year, and I asked them all to like give me names of people they would keep in touch with on behalf of the organization or introduce to the organization. And I've really dropped the ball on like getting that started, but I want to pick it back up. It's an idea I got from someone else, is to like ask each board member to choose like 5 people in their life who they'd be willing to just like keep in touch with about the organization, and at some point make an ask during the year.
That's a great one too. Yeah.
Solid.
I just gave them a 3 people assignment recently, so I like hearing that other people are using that. Like 2 or 3 people that you really think would love to hear about our work. Getting them comfortable with like just having conversations before you offer. Sometimes you don't need to ask people for money if you just talk to them about the work. Cool.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, moving along. All right, so I was thinking about like if I were to, try to separate the activities from like the methods. My thinking was like there's the supporter initiated, like I mentioned, like the people versus the calendar. So it's supporter initiated, self-motivated. And I would say the versus, if we want to pretend that there's only 2, would be like the organization driven model. So the supporter initiated would be, again, the friend of the organization asks their wedding guests to make a donation in lieu of gifts, right? So it's that volunteers initiates the work, but they still need to be supported. So we've already talked about like you might help. Well, certainly there are going to be times where you just find out because gifts show up and it's like in honor of Lisa and Polly's wedding, and you're like, what? Who are Lisa and Polly and why? What? So like that can happen too. But sometimes you get folks who actually reach out ahead of time and it's like, I'm going to do this thing, and can you help me make it successful? That's when you need to support. You need to support them. You can give them content. Like what I try to do is I try to think about like, there's a language that we use because we have to, and it's like tested and perfect. And then there's like more like language that you want to make sure that the person who's doing the fundraising for you is comfortable using. So I will sometimes work with them and say like, this is our tried and tested way that we talk about our programs. How do you, when you see this, how do you talk about it? How would you talk about it to your friends? And then I, and I hear them talk, and it might not be perfect, but it's okay because it's how they speak. Their friends need to feel like it is authentic to their voice. So while I give them sample content, I try to make it as digestible and accessible as possible. And I really encourage them to like edit it up and change it up so that it is in their voice, so it feels so much more heartfelt. They can always click the link and go to our website to see how we talk about ourselves and see how we talk about our programs. My favorite example of this was I worked in an organization that helped folks with severe and persistent mental illness. And one of our board members was a very active ambassador. He always made connections, he would solicit, he would do all the things, but he could not seem to understand the difference between mental illness and developmental and other disabilities. So he would often talk like fundamental piece of our mission was that we help folks with severe and persistent mental illness. And he would often introduce our work to other people as helping folks with developmental and other disabilities or intellectual disabilities. But he would talk about our programs perfectly. He would talk about what we did. He would talk about how we changed lives. He would talk about the people that he met, and was really an active volunteer in the organization. So yeah, we had to do cleanup. But his passion about the organization, even if he didn't truly like understand like the nuance between these two things, didn't matter. It brought people in. We corrected the record. Those people often stuck around for a while because his passion for the work and them seeing the work happen made them passionate about it too. They tended to get it right. So that's what I'd be like. I help folks with content, but let them talk in their own voice. You don't want them to get it wrong, but if let people be human. I would also give them graphics. Like here's some photos that we use. Here's our logo so that they don't, try to rip the one off the website that may be not the right level of clarity for, a card that they lay on the tables at their party or something. And if you are using an online tool, that they have access to and training on how to use that tool. And then I would, just give them tips, tricks, things to make it effective. Folks usually get pretty jazzed about people's response. They get sad when folks aren't. They want to know how to make what they can do to make it more successful. And yeah, so I mentor them like I would mentor a new fundraiser. Well, you could try this, you could try that. Don't take it personally, and all the things. So I added in this responsibility part, going right back to like Marissa's comment about how do we try to make these folks sticky. Well, we got to thank them. And when we thank them, we've got to reference them back to the thing that brought them in the door. We have to acknowledge that we see that. So not just the autoresponder if they clicked on the website button. So yeah, I've had situations where like the supporter gave me a list, like these are my wedding invitees. If any of these people give, it's because I asked them to. So for like a while, I had to like hand out that list to anyone who touched our database and be like, if you see any of these people, let me know so that I can tell this, this couple that one of their guests gave a gift. But, so it's important that you do more than just like the typical thank you, and then you track it back to the gift, because the donor is going to think that it's way more organized, even if it isn't. And then I also will keep up with that couple or that person, the supporter who initiated that campaign or that activity, and be like, even if it's 2 or 3 years down the road, more than likely they're still involved with the organization because they did this, they showed you that they loved you because they did this extra thing. But it'd be like, hey, remember, I just wanted to let you know that, your wedding guest, Tim, is still supporting our organization, and I just can't thank you enough for bringing Tim to our organization. And that just really just pays dividends in your relationship building by remembering back to the thing that they did that brought people into your organization and thanking them again.
I have a question about that last.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something I've always wondered for peer-to-peer fundraising is, are there any confidentiality issues with giving the fundraiser the list of like names and amounts of like if like the wedding example, or sometimes like people might do like a memorial, ask for donations for a memorial. And I always wonder, like, should I send the person who initiated it a list of names and amounts, or is that like violating some donor confidentiality?
I think that that's a internal sort of like, what is your comfort level in your organization question. I always erred on the side of transparency. Like, will the couple know that I got a sale when I bought the toaster and didn't spend as much as it was listed in their registry? No, but they're going to know that the toaster cost typically X amount of dollars. When I have dealt, especially with wedding situations, because a gift is really like tends to be super important, that the size of the gift tends to be super important to the couple. They want to know that like that the gift that my organization is getting for their wedding is equal to or similarly sized to the size of the gift that they would have gotten had they just asked for cash. Because I've had conversations with couples who are like, we were thinking about asking everyone to just give us cash so then we could turn around and give that cash to you all, but we didn't want to like make it, we wanted you all to like get more donors too, and then you could make them friends with you, like, or we didn't want to make it look like we were trying to get credit for other people's money. And I was, and I was like, well, like, of course, if they give directly, they get the tax deduction, as if that's a thing anymore. But there is a drop off that, it is pretty common that if I was giving, that, not me, because I'm not going to be this, rude, but like if I was going to give the couple $250 for the wedding and they asked me to give it to the nonprofit, I'd give $250 or more to the nonprofit. But other people look at it as like, score, I don't have to give as much because, but so I typically would let them know, because it's something that they will care about. If the organization is like, we don't share that information, then you don't share the information. I also come from an era where doing an annual report where you listed your donors and the amount of money that they gave was a common thing. So to me, it always seemed like, no, I'm not going to tell you what this person gave. And in 6 months, it's going to be in the annual report that they were in the $250 club,
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. So when it's an organization initiated and driven campaign, then that's when you get into all of the heavy lifting, right? You develop the structure, you have to develop the goals, you build the strategy. I didn't get into a lot of specifics here because, as we already discussed, it can be anything. Like, there's just so many options for what peer-to-peer fundraising can be. So if folks want to see like a sketch out of what a very specific P2P campaign would look like run by an organization, let's talk about that when we get to the Q&A in a few more slides, and I'll build that into the second part where we have the bigger discussion. And I would love to especially know at that point, like, if folks have done stuff and want to share documents, because I like this to be a sharing community, and I also would like to use real world examples that folks can speak on. But when you're doing something that is organization initiated, there's typically structure around it. Typical one is Giving Tuesday, as we all know, or your giving days. Board fundraising, honestly, is the one that I feel like is the most obvious example where you have a goal, you have a set of people, you're doing a set of activity to get those people to move towards a goal. Now with board members, it's usually like you're chasing that cat for the entire year before you actually land anywhere. If you shorten the campaign, what I've tried to do is shorten the campaign and be like, this is the board fundraising season and this is where we're going to do your thing. And then you don't have to think about fundraising until this time next year when we do the board fundraising campaign again. But the benefit of an organization initiating and driving the campaign is you really get to steer the content, the momentum. You make sure that they're all using the right branded imagery and logo, and if you're really like, you don't want the person to use the wrong language when talking about your organization, this is where you can shine. You get to really say like, talk about us in this way, and here's some samples of this, here's a sample ask, here's a sample Facebook post, here's a sample tweet, here's a sample Insta post, or sorry, the gram. Apparently I found out that I'm dating myself when I say Insta. So the other fun thing about if you organize it is you can also create a sense of like camaraderie around the folks in the team. They can share with each other, they can support each other. You can create even a little bit of friendly competition with each other. And that I think also makes it more enjoyable for the folks who are participating in it, and maybe even for you. It makes it less like, I don't know. I tend to have fun with, when folks are having fun. Maybe I'm weird. But so your typical example would be you're going to do a P2P campaign revolving around your local giving days, and you recruit a team of people and turn it all into a competition. Like that is a very typical organization initiated and driven P2P campaign. The one thing that I want to really point out is like with anything, you want to make sure that the people who are doing all this extra stuff really do feel the love. And in the very progressive multiplier sort of anti-nonprofit industrial complex way, I think it's important to like think about ways to honor and celebrate people, not just based on dollars raised, but based on other markers of activity and effort. Again, like my rich cousin is going to, if I get her to join my campaign and be one of my fundraising team members, she's going to knock out the park, my friend who isn't wealthy, because, they live in very different worlds. But my friend who isn't wealthy may bring more people to the organization, may do a whole lot of extra activity. And I don't want to like be like, you lost, you win, because the dollars, beat. I want to be able to be like, you know what, you're the rock star because you did all of these things. You did the extra. So I think about like things like total donors, like, and multiple prizes, like give, and think small, like, I'm not talking about like, don't feel like you have to like give away more than what you brought in as thank yous, but like total donors, total recurring donors, highest success rate, like this person asked 100 people and 98 of them gave, like whatever the success rate is. And then like, I think it's also like important to do like a sad trombone type of award for folks, like, because it's hard and then you try and sometimes you just don't succeed, but like giving a round of applause and giving some love to the person who tried and didn't make it, I think is also really great. Great thing to do. And also just makes even that feeling of not being successful fun. And in the end of the day, you can celebrate the fact that that person, there was success. That person asked people, that person educated a whole bunch of people about your organization. That person shared information on their social or talked about you at a dinner party or did whatever. They were an ambassador for you. And that is a huge gift. So whether it turned into cash, who cares? Like you still celebrate them. That makes sense? All right, the campaign, how to build it. It's sort of, So think about the questions that you want to ask when you're starting. Is like, what channels do we want to use? And this is the bigger. This isn't the like, of course, the supporter initiated stuff. This is about the organization and driven stuff. So what channels do you want to use? What communication tools do you want to use? Who's on your team and who's on the ask team? And I make that differentiation because even if you are a shop of one, you will have a team in your organization. Your executive director is going to be on your back or going to be involved. Maybe your colleagues are going to be involved. And if they aren't organically involved, then get them involved. Let everyone know you're doing this thing, because it's going to be weird, in my opinion, if you have a group of volunteers who are doing this external campaign and no one else in the organization seems to know it's happening or is participating in it. So you don't want somebody on your ask team who is friends with like your director or fill in the blank be like, hey, I'm doing this fundraising. I'm participating in the fundraising campaign. And they're like, the what? So, like let your whole organization know and recruit folks from inside to be part of the team. They could be great. They might not do the fundraising, but maybe they do like some cheerleading of the askers. Maybe they help provide the collateral information, materials, bite-sized quotes and stuff that folks need to help their campaigns be successful. So development, communications, digital, and anyone with a pulse. That I think in the asker team, I think of like those, that ever expanding circle of friends. You've got the close in people, of course, should be participating as an ask team. The board, if you have staff who want to be askers, awesome. And I put super volunteers in that category, not your run of the mill volunteers, but those folks who are like always and forever showing up. The next ring out would be donors, friends, volunteers in general. Think about what you want the parameters to be. Is this going to be like a full-on acquisition situation where you just want them to bring in new people to the organization? And so like a broadcast out situation. Some peer-to-peer campaigns will use the house file and be like, these are our lapsed donors. And the ask team is really about reaching out to these folks and trying to bring them back, or maybe they're just part of it. Maybe the ask team does their list plus some lapsed folks, depending on what you're using as your campaign. Like if it's a Facebook campaign, that's not going to work that way. But if it's like phone calls, emails, and texts from an asker, those phone calls, emails, and texts can go to their friends and family and supporters in the organization with just slightly different text content to those people. If you're going to go that approach, then you just have to put some extra thought into like, how do you want to distribute the list and how you want to organize that activity? And then think about your communications cadence. And this is the different communication cadence from what your askers do. If you're going to do an organization-wide campaign, an organization-driven initiated campaign around peer-to-peer fundraising, you want to make sure that you're amplifying it. So if it's around giving days, for example, you want to make sure that you have a really good cadence of messaging going out to support the giving days. You don't need to necessarily talk about that peer-to-peer fundraising activities happening. You can, but you just want to make sure that organizationally you're promoting giving at the same time. Organizationally, you're promoting your programs at the same time. If they're fundraising for a particular program or a campaign in your organization, that you're promoting that campaign at the same time. And then you can, the other thing to think about is a premium, not just the gifts to the askers and to the people on the team that are helping, but is there a hook that you're going to try to give? Everyone who participates in the peer-to-peer fundraising gets a sticker, gets a discount at your store. you know, gets a cool postcard or a button. You don't have to have a premium, clearly, but something to think about, that it might be a way to help build some interest. Does that make sense to folks? Are there other questions that you would be asking yourself in the before running a campaign? I want to keep going then. So then we get into this issue of technology. Now, I was going to do like a major deep dive here, but the landscape is huge for peer-to-peer fundraising tools. And you'll see in the next slide a little bit of what I'm talking about. But if you're thinking about like technology and how to bring those tech tools in, there's a lot of, there's things that you need to think about, like, is it customizable? Is it easy to use? Does it connect to social media platforms? It would be great if it integrated into your CRM, but there are ones out there. These are just typical names that you can look into. Some are really expensive, some maybe not so much. But for example, Fundraise, which I just only learned yesterday when I was doing the research, is having like this special event right now where if you they're going to give you out the peer-to-peer fundraising tool for free if you sign up before the end of the month, so that folks can do peer-to-peer fundraising for end of the year. Cool tool, cool resource. But there are lots out there. There's lots of different information on various tools. I would check out, if you want a tool that helps you do crowdfunding and fundraising, make sure that it's easy to use and understand for your end users. When you work with volunteers, you got to educate them. You need to have a training module. You have to have things that are sound bites, like these are the pieces of info that we were talking about, Kirsten. Have little impact stories, have really short descriptions of your program areas. You want to make sure you're doing things to motivate them and share them on like halfway through and, way to go. And yay, we got another one. Celebrate their successes, stay connected, like really just try to communicate and keep engaged with all of your people who are doing the soliciting on your behalf. You want to make sure that you're equipping your team, like I just said, with the goals and expectations, you're giving them a training. Timelines are very important. Folks need deadlines, even if they don't like them. But one way to make this stuff easy is you're creating a folder that isn't shareable so that people can go in and grab the things that they need at any time, but also know that they can reach out to you when they've got questions. And you got to thank everybody when the campaign is done. Do more than autoresponders when it comes to donors. Make sure they're going through your welcome series. Do all the things to do donor retention. Do the extra to thank the volunteers who put on the campaign. I really do think it's important to do some type of a token gift, but also keeping them informed when folks continue to give. And then all of the colleagues who've been putting up with all your stuff and been dealing with all your craziness and helping you get the collateral materials to all of your volunteers so that you can do all the fundraising. As we know, as fundraisers, saying thank you is the most important thing that we can do on a daily basis. Not, not in a gross way, manipulative way, but like literally genuine thank you, because people are really awesome when they raise money for you. And we're right at time, but I want to know if anybody's got questions, the last 30-second questions or things that you want to say as we end today's session.
Hi, Polly, it's Carol again. I was wondering, will we get copies of these slides?
Yes, we have a YouTube channel. If you hit me up with an email, I can send you the PDF, but we have a private YouTube channel that all of these presentations go on like a week or so after they happen. So you can watch the presentation again and we can send you the PDF of the deck. Our next session, September 30th, part 2. Let me know what you need me to add for the next one, and I'll try to get it in there. If any,
This is so helpful. Thank you.
oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for participating in the conversation. All right, y'all. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Talk soon.